Hello, everybody. Welcome to Cryptids and Critters Paranormal. I'm your host, the Deuster. I've got a paranormal experience I want to share with you today. It is possibly the most terrifying experience I ever had in my life. This story is featured in my book, Ghostly Whispers. It's available on Amazon. I also can get you a copy shipped from my house, a signed copy if you want it. Shoot me an email to ghosthunter911 at gmail.com. It's ghosthunter911 at gmail.com. And I will make sure you get a signed copy delivered to your mailbox. I call this story Bubba's Last Visit. In early 1971, I had a close friend who we all called Bubba. Bubba wasn't his real name, but all of his family and friends called him that. Bubba was a special friend. You see, Bubba had muscular dystrophy and had been confined to a wheelchair for many years. Sadly, I first met Bubba during the last year of his life, although I had gone to school with his sisters since the first grade. Bubba and his family were big into Citizens Band radio and had been for many years. In fact, my very first conversation with Bubba was over a cheap old walkie-talkie we had rigged up with an oversized antenna. Walkie-talkies weren't supposed to talk that far, which was about 3 miles. But I guess fate played a hand in Bubba and I talking that day. I don't have any other explanation for it. Anyway, after the initial contact, Bubba and I became close friends. I went to see him several times a week and was always amazed at his cheery disposition despite his physical handicaps. His radio knobs had been replaced with T-handles, so his gnarly little fingers could manipulate them as he switched through the frequencies while seated in his wheelchair. Bubba was an inspiration to all who knew him, and he had friends the world over. Several months into our friendship, Bubba was hospitalized with bronchial pneumonia, which was very dangerous in his physical condition. His prognosis was not good, and Bubba got worse with each passing day. One night at work, I got the dreaded phone call telling me Bubba was about to die, and if I wanted to see him alive, I had better get to the hospital pretty quick. I made it in time, and Bubba drew his last breath while I stood there by his side holding his hand. A couple of days later, he was laid to rest in Memorial Gardens in Springfield. Excuse me. Bubba's parents asked my dad if we had anywhere they could store Bubba's wheelchair, as it held too many painful memories for them to look at, sitting empty at his radio desk. Daddy picked it up and brought it to our house, storing it in an unused bedroom upstairs, which was accessed by a stairway behind a door in my bedroom. We thought nothing more about it until that night I went to bed as usual, and about that time I got settled in good. The door to my bedroom flew wide open, and a cold breeze filled the room. At that point, I just thought the wind was to blame, and I started to get up and close the door. Something sat down on the side of my bed. Thinking it was my brother walking in his sleep, I took my foot and attempted to boot him off my bed. But to my surprise, there was nothing there. I looked at the side of the bed and saw an impression of someone or something sitting there. But there was no one there that I could see. I attempted to scream, but I was too terrified to even make a sound. I hid my head under the covers, unable to move. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, which in reality was only probably a matter of minutes, whoever or whatever it was got up from my bed. I could hear the floorboards creaking as it made its way across the floor toward my brother's bed, where it again sat down. I managed to force my eyes open, and I could see the same impression on the side of his bed. His head was also under the covers. I do not know exactly how long it sat there, but a short time later it moved from the bed and made its way toward the stairway door. It knocked down the ladder on the top bunk bed where my youngest brother lay sleeping. What happened next was the most terrifying. Whatever this entity was, it evidently wanted to get upstairs in the worst way. It scratched on the door to the stairway for several minutes while I lay frozen, terrified in my bed and unable to move. The noise awoke my youngest brother, and he began crying. After that, my brother and I finally found our voices, and we all joined in. Daddy came running into the room, and we told him what had happened. We slept in their room the remainder of the night. Next door to us lived a gentleman named Johnny Fort. We kids called him Uncle Johnny, as was the common practice at that time. Every morning he was up before daybreak feeding his livestock. As Daddy went out to the car to go to work that morning, he saw Uncle Johnny at the barn, and during their conversation, the subject of the previous night came up. Daddy told him what we had witnessed, expecting him to laugh at such a tall tale. Instead, Uncle Johnny was dead serious as he told Daddy what we needed to do. That boy's spirit is attached to that wheelchair, and is trying to get back to it. What you need to do is leave that door open so his spirit can get back to that wheelchair. Trust me, if you don't, that boy's ghost will haunt you from now on. We decided to do what Uncle Johnny said, and that night we propped the stairway door open with a broom. All was quiet and nothing happened until we went to bed. About that time, I thought nothing was going to happen. The bedroom door abruptly opened, and the temperature in the room dropped dramatically as whatever it was came into the room. Again, I was terrified. This time, though, it didn't sit on my bed. I could hear it breathing and sense it as it stood by my bed, as if telling me goodbye. After a moment, I heard it cross the floor and make its way to my brother's bed, where it again stood for a short while. And as it moved toward the stairway door, it brushed against the bunk bed ladder and moved it, only this time it didn't fall. The floorboards creaked and propped as it made its way to the stairway. As it climbed the stairs, each stair step creaked and moaned as the entity slowly made its way up steps, then into the back room where the wheelchair was waiting. If this was the spirit of Bubba, evidently it found what it was looking for we never experienced anything further, at least not for several years anyway. A couple of years later, my parents moved and took the wheelchair with them, storing it in an old building by the house. One day my brother Timmy and my nephew Nathan got the wheelchair out and took turns pushing each other around the yard with it. That night, both of them had the same exact nightmare about something chasing them in a wheelchair. A few years later, my parents moved to Oakland Road in Springfield and again took the wheelchair with them, placing it in a small storage building behind the house. It was completely forgotten about until one day, Gary, one of the neighbor's kids, found it and dragged it out of the building. Evidently forgetting about what had happened earlier, Timmy and Gary pushed each other around in it, and even got it out on the highway and rode it down the hill in front of the house. Again, both of them had frightening nightmares that night, and afterwards, neither of them would go anywhere near that wheelchair, claiming it was haunted. The last time I saw it, it was folded up in the back of the old building, and after my father passed away, my mother sold the house. And this time the wheelchair did not go. I'm not sure exactly where it is now, and I really don't care to find out. While we lived there in the house at Orange Chapel, where Bubba's ghost made its appearance, The property at the time was owned by the Bolins, and before that it belonged to Harry Rainwater, who lived across the road on top of a brick house on top of the hill. A long, narrow gravel driveway led up to the house, and we called it Rainwater Lane, although it had no official name. It was just a driveway. Beside our house was a stable where Uncle Johnny Ford and his brother Jack kept their farm mules, like I talked about earlier. As mentioned, every morning about daylight, either Jack or Johnny went to the barn to feed and tend the mules. Usually it was Johnny, because he lived just a few yards down the road, and when the weather permitted, he walked to the barn. If weather was bad, he drove his old truck up there. One morning, Johnny was approaching the barn, as he had hundreds of times, and noticed a woman walking toward him on the road. He waved and spoke to her, but she never even acknowledged him. Then she turned and walked into the tree-lined lane. Curious as to who would be out that time of morning and what business she had at the Rainwater house, he walked to the lane, which was just a few feet from the barn, to challenge her, to see what she was doing, what she needed. When he glanced down the lane, he was surprised to find no one there. Somewhere along the lane, she had simply disappeared. This thing was repeated several times over the years, and it was witnessed firsthand by Johnny and Jack, as well as Mr. Rainwater. Daddy had heard the tale of the mysterious woman, but had never witnessed it for himself until that one morning back in 1970. Daddy always got up early, even after he became disabled and had to quit work. He was usually up by 5 every morning without fail. On this particular morning, he was checking the oil in the car before my mother went to work, as he did every day without fail. He noticed a woman walk into the lane. He walked to the lane and saw her several yards away. As they stood in the road and watched her as she made her way along the lane, she just simply vanished. So that was a little tale I wanted to share with you. Like I said, these are featured in my book, Ghostly Whispers. If you want a copy of it, it's on Amazon. If you want a signed copy, shoot me an email to ghosthunter911@gmail.com. That's ghosthunter911@gmail.com. And I will make sure that you get a signed copy delivered to your mailbox. I hope you enjoyed the little story. This is Cryptids and Critters Paranormal. If you will, subscribe to my page, like it, share it. And like I said, once again, this is the Deuster, and we will catch you on the flip-flop. Have a good day.